All right, hello. I'm building a pizza oven, and I watched a lot of videos on YouTube to get an idea of the process and the key steps, but they were coming from like professionals, and I didn't see too many videos from like total novices. So I thought about halfway through the project, I would just like give a summary of what I've done, what I think was important, what I regret, and yeah. So very first thing that I did was dig a trench, and this is the 36-inch oven, again following the Forno Bravo PDF. And I went about probably 6 inches deep on it, and I framed it up with old lumber. And I think that was probably my first mistake, was when I framed the concrete slab. I wasn't dealing with good straight and square lumber. It was really old and it kind of bowed a little bit, so it was hard to find the center. But I did it with just bags of extra strength Quikrete that I bought from Home Depot, and ended up probably having like 32 bags, mostly 60-pound bags, going into that concrete slab. I finished it with this like acrylic sealant to help it cure, and it popped off just fine. The framing did, and pretty good slab. Not perfectly level, but I actually think that's fine. All the videos I saw emphasized everything being perfectly level. I think this is okay. I was able to square it up by mortaring the cinder blocks, and now I think water drains off of it better. I threw some gravel on the edge. I do want to finish filling that in, and underneath I had a thin layer of gravel, so I didn't go overboard. Definitely didn't go beneath the frost line. That would have taken probably another, like, I don't know, 80 bags of concrete to make it below the frost line here. So hopefully that works out. And there was rebar in there too. Next up, dry stack the cinder blocks. These angle irons are from Home Depot. These cinder blocks are from Home Depot. They weren't all identical, something I realized after the fact. If you come over here, you can see that like some of them had these flat edges, others had like, they stuck out a little further, and they have like this ridge in the center, and they were all in the same pallet, so I'm not sure why there were different types, but if I could do it again, I would have bought all the identical type. Once I had these stacked in, I filled every other core with just random garbage. This is something that didn't really make sense to me when I was watching videos. Is I thought concrete flows if you have just like garbage sitting in every other core. Won't it kind of just flow through? And I think because there's so much gravel in concrete, it tended to just like get stuck. So even though I plugged them just with like random garbage, it was enough to stop it from flowing into the empty cores. And the cores that I had filled, they were already full. Threw some like random metal scraps from around the yard in there. Then I framed up the second slab up top, which ended up being too thick. This is about 5.5 inches. And when I reread the PDF, it said it only had to be about 3 inches thick. So I may have overdid this, but it seems to be holding up just fine. I poured this about 3 days ago. And yeah, put more rebar in there. And instead of using plywood to like fill in the cavity, I used hardy backer board, which is cheap. And the benefit is you don't have to remove it, because it's like this concrete fiber board, as I understand it. It can just stay in there for the life of the oven. Even if it were to break, because it's not going edge to edge, the concrete will just rest on the cinder blocks. So didn't have to worry about taking out my framing afterwards. And if you film under here, I saw some other people, to support the cavity that the concrete slab is on top of, they had like a lot of elaborate, I don't know, like 2x4 framing. I just had some extra cinder blocks that I stacked and then filled in some scrap lumber to support the center. And I think that worked just fine. I'll probably take those out in another day or two. And finally, I forgot to add insulating concrete as like its own distinct layer. So something I regret is that I forgot that, and then I kind of just mixed in perlite afterwards. So underneath the oven floor here, it's kind of just a mixture of concrete and perlite, not in any precise ratio, but hopefully enough to add a little bit of insulation. When I started laying the oven floor, the PDF said to get fire clay and things like this that I didn't really have access to. So I just did some like regular clay like that you would use for ceramics, and mixed it up with a little bit of perlite and sand, and threw that in as just a way of keeping the bricks secure. I did the herringbone pattern, which I think looks really nice. And the bricks are not perfectly level, but I actually think in like day-to-day operation of the oven, you're probably not really going to notice like, like a 32nd of an inch ridge right here. I think it'll be just fine, and I can always grind it out later. Okay, so probably the biggest issue that I had when starting this project is, where do I get fire brick? All the people with YouTube videos just started off with a mountain of fire bricks next to their workstation, from what I could tell. I couldn't really find them anywhere. They weren't at Home Depot, they weren't at Lowe's, they weren't at any Ace Hardware. And then there was a ceramic supply store for people who build like outdoor kilns that I found about an hour south of where I live in Massachusetts. And the issue was they cost $6 per brick, which seemed kind of prohibitively expensive. And I probably would have had to have gone for that, except I found a masonry supply store that had plenty of fire bricks. These were about $2 or $3 each, these right here. And then the question was, how do I cut the bricks? A lot of the people I saw on YouTube had like these, diamond tipped like miter saws that looked very fancy and expensive. A lot of the guides said to rent one. What I did is I just got this little Ryobi angle grinder. I took off the safety, don't tell anyone, to make the cuts deeper. And I found this like a masonry blade, a diamond tipped 4.5-inch masonry blade. And it does not cut all the way through the bricks, but it cuts about halfway through, and then I can just like stamp on the brick after I make the cut, and it tends to be a pretty clean cut. That's why these ridges look so rough. You can see right here, that's where this thing actually cut. And then afterwards I tap it with like a rubber mallet essentially, and then this part breaks. So it's not perfectly square, but it'll be covered up eventually. And the flat surfaces are what make up the interior of the oven. So this thing was $60, and I think it's worked great. And it's gotten me, it's allowed me to make shapes like this that will eventually form the archway, which is the part I'm most nervous about next. I think forming the archway will be difficult, but in terms of my indispensable tool, the thing that you use to make sure that you're forming, a consistent radius on your sphere. Again, I saw other YouTube videos that made it look really fancy. Mine was simple. I just took a little wheel off of a chair, used essentially loppers to take off the rubber wheel, and then put this roughly 16-inch piece of lumber in there, glued another piece of lumber on the side to guide the bricks, and it has too much give. It's not perfect, but it's resting on this 32-inch piece of lumber that has it sit pretty square, and then I'm just marked with a marker. So if it shifts around, not a big deal. I can just visualize where that exact center is, and that's worked pretty well, and I hope it keeps going well. And yeah, so I'll post more photos as I go along, but I hope some of that information has been useful. Thanks, guys.